Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. I'm Scott Wiener. I have the honor of representing San Francisco and northern San Mateo County in the California State Senate. And we're here today to announce new legislation, Senate Bill 222, the Affordable Insurance and Climate Recovery Act, a first-in-the-nation plan to tackle California's crises of climate crisis and also the massive problems that we have in our insurance market. I want to thank SB 222's organizational co-sponsors, California EnviroVoters, the Center for Climate Integrity, and Extreme Weather Survivors, a survivor group for climate disasters. I also want to thank the Consumer Federation of California, which is also here with us today in support. As Los Angeles begins its long and painful recovery from these wildfires, I'm also proud to have the support of our bill's co-authors, including my colleagues in the Senate, Senator Sasha Renee Perez, who represents Altadena, in addition to Senator Henry Stern, Senator Caroline Menjivar, and Senator Jerry McNerney. In the Assembly, the co-authors are Assemblymember Dawn Addis and Assemblymember Al Muratsuchi. We know that Californians are paying a devastating price for the climate-driven disasters that have racked our state in recent years and that are escalating. The wildfires in Los Angeles, which thankfully are being brought under control, although now there is risk of mudslides, the absolutely catastrophic wildfires happening in the middle of winter. And we need to say that again, happening in the middle of winter. But of course, these wildfires are not the only ones. We've had, even in recent months, fires in various parts of the state. We had extreme storms in Northern California last fall, causing massive damage. We are seeing flooding, just all sorts of climate-driven disasters that are causing untold harm in our state. We know that we're seeing people lose their homes, their businesses, people losing their lives, having their communities completely disrupted, multi-generational communities that are being torn apart from these climate-fueled disasters. And right now, when we look, these disasters happen, and then who pays for them? In addition to the victims who have lost their homes, have their communities just torn apart, it's us. It's taxpayers, because of course we step in to help communities rebuild, as we should. And it is insurance premium payers, policyholders, people who pay insurance premiums. We know that insurance in California is escalating in cost, and it continues to escalate, and it's going to keep moving in that direction. We are all paying for these disasters. But there is one stakeholder that is not paying, the fossil fuel industry, which makes the product that is fueling climate change. And this is an industry that has known that its product was fueling climate change and was going to lead to these disasters for decades, because they had the science. They sat on that science, they suppressed it, and then the fossil fuel industry for decades has played a huge role in incapacitating government policymakers from taking the steps that need to be taken to transition away from fossil fuels and towards a clean energy economy. And they have done all of this in order to make money, plain and simple. And we know that they have made money. The fossil fuel industry has endless resources. Profits continue to just spiral and spiral into the stratosphere. And then we are left holding the bag in terms of paying for these disasters. And people who lose their homes or their businesses are left holding the bag. And so SB 222 will allow or will ensure that the fossil fuel industry is part of the solution. It will allow those who have been harmed in these climate disasters to seek damages in court from the fossil fuel companies who have done business in California and who suppressed the truth going back so many years about what their product was going to do in terms of climate change and climate disasters. And it will allow insurance companies, which are paying out these claims and who right now have raised premiums to pay for that, it will allow the insurance companies to also seek damages from the fossil fuel companies so that those increased costs that insurance companies are facing aren't only passed along to policyholders, but that the fossil fuel companies are also helping in that regard, which will mean less pressure for upward cost increases for insurance premiums. We know that California has huge affordability problems, and we know that ever increasing insurance premiums, those costs are going to increasingly cause some people not to be able to own a home or to have to give up their home because they can't afford the insurance. We're going to see more and more small businesses unable to get insurance, which means they may have to close. And so SB 222 is a really important step forward. And the third piece I wanted to say is about the FAIR Plan. Right now, the FAIR Plan is our insurance carrier of last resort for folks who cannot get insurance in the private market. And this bill will require an evaluation of whether it makes sense financially for the FAIR Plan to sue the fossil fuel industry. And if that evaluation comes back that the benefits outweigh the costs, then the FAIR Plan will also be required to file, or will be required to file that lawsuit. Because in the end, if the FAIR Plan runs out of money, right now it's policyholders who have to replenish the FAIR Plan. The oil industry should be part of that solution as well. So we know that this is going to, I want to just be transparent, this is going to be a tough bill. We know that the oil industry has a lot of power and has endless resources and has a long track record of obstructing and sometimes killing reforms to take strong climate action. But we're ready for the fight, and I look forward to the conversation ahead and to moving SB 222 forward. I now want to invite up Robert Hurrell from the Consumer Federation of California.
Good afternoon. My name is Robert Hurrell. I'm the Executive Director of the Consumer Federation of California. I also was a Deputy Insurance Commissioner for almost 6 years at the California Department of Insurance. Thank you, Senator Wiener, for asking me to speak at the unveiling of this important piece of legislation. We're all shocked and saddened at the loss of life and massive devastation we're seeing down in Southern California. And while we help those in the LA basin get back on their feet, it's never too early to think about how California public policy can and should be modified to help consumers. That means simply making those responsible for these disasters, in whole or in part, pay their fair share. That's why the Consumer Federation of California heartily endorses this bill. This bill will help level the playing field between consumers and the raw exercise of corporate power that they're facing. The dirty secret of our current insurance crisis is that fossil fuel companies have lied and misled the public about the damage they cause. This bill gives consumers a fair shot at getting true accountability for these crises. To improve insurance affordability and availability, we must make fossil fuel companies pay their fair share. Insurance companies use the legal doctrine of subrogation to get reimbursed for damages that are caused or exacerbated by others. Very common. Following the devastating fires of 2017 and 2018, insurers received, for example, billions of dollars from PG&E for their responsibility for many of those fires in Northern California. As many of you recall, the Camp Fire that burned down the city of Paradise led to insurers collecting around $11 billion from PG&E. This same idea should apply to fossil fuel companies for their massive contribution to these fires driven by climate change. But the reality is that insurers are reluctant to go after fossil fuel companies because, and here's the other dirty secret of our current situation, insurance companies themselves invest hundreds of billions of dollars into fossil fuel companies that directly makes climate change worse. Insurance availability and affordability in certain parts of the state are both at a crisis point in California. This bill should directly help both elements of that equation. Unaffordable insurance is tantamount to unavailable insurance. We thank Senator Wiener and the other legislators, and we look forward to working hard to make this proposal into California law. Thank you.
Thank you. I now want to call up Matt Abulharach Macias, who's a resident of Los Angeles and with California Environmental Voters.
Good afternoon. I'm Matt Abulharach Macias, Deputy Campaigns Director at California Environmental Voters, but I'm also here today as a resident of Los Angeles. The start of this year has been horrific for our community. You all have seen the pictures, the videos, heard the stories of the way the wildfires devastated Los Angeles. The images don't share enough of how I actually felt to be there in that moment. I was personally afraid and anxious, panicked with each update that came about the fires movements, new evacuation orders. I had my emergency bag ready to go on a moment's notice. Everyone else I know in LA shared this experience. And it's not over. We're going to be living with the long-lasting emotional, health, and economic impacts of this climate-fueled disaster. Whole neighborhoods and communities turn to ash and dust. We know wildfires are possible. We've seen them happen before. But the extreme wildfires that ravaged Los Angeles this year are not normal and nothing like we've experienced before. Like the senator said, this happened in January. In January, yes, in January, we experienced the costliest extreme wildfire disaster that has ever occurred. This is not normal. Conditions were exacerbated by extremely dry and unusually warm weather that's not happened historically or supposed to happen in January. October maybe is usually when we can imagine these kinds of conditions, but it's particularly troubling that this occurred in the winter. Was it out of season, or is this the new reality moving forward? The scale of damage is unprecedented. Lives have been lost. Family homes, businesses, schools, places of worship, gone forever. Everyone I know in LA knows at least one person who has lost it all. Personally, I know more than I can count on one hand. And this devastation cannot be normalized. But what we know is that due to a changing climate, it's likely it could happen again. And the question is, who will pick up the pieces and costs to restore what has been lost? We know who has profited at record numbers and intentionally so by putting us in this crisis. Big oil, fossil fuel companies. That is why the Affordable Insurance and Climate Recovery Act is critical to California's future. It should not be incumbent on the state, taxpayers, the federal government, and generous community members to pick up the costs to recover and rebuild communities and livelihoods. We used to be able to rely on investments in insurance policy to protect us from such tragedy. However, climate-fueled natural disasters are creating an insurance crisis in California. When California has a more expensive and depleted insurance market, it not only creates an affordability crisis here, but it will also affect affordability in economies across the country. Climate change is driving an affordability crisis, and we know who is responsible for driving the climate crisis. That's why we're working with Senator Scott Wiener, Senator Sasha Renee Perez, on the Affordable Insurance and Climate Recovery Act. It wasn't just the extreme wildfires in LA that created the need, but it made it more apparent and this moment more urgent for this solution that addresses both the affordability crisis and climate crisis in California. We need to pass the Affordable Insurance and Climate Recovery Act. This bill sets a path forward for affordable insurance for all Californians. It's a step towards justice for families forced to rebuild their lives, and long overdue accountability for big oil and fossil fuel companies who must take responsibility for the devastation they have caused. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We're happy to answer a few questions from the media.
Senator Wiener,
Well, the fossil fuel companies that are subject to this are companies that have done business in California since, I believe it's 1965, and who have suppressed and deceived the public. And so they're the ones that are liable under this bill. There may be other, so they don't have to be, it doesn't have to be this oil company, their emissions are somehow attached to this fire. That's not how climate change works. So it's broader than that. There may be other sources of liability. We know that if, like with PG&E and the Camp Fire, I know there have been, I've heard some talk about SoCal Edison and the Eaton Fire, but I don't want to prejudge that. There will be a full investigation. If a utility plays a role in sparking a fire, then that's a separate source of liability. And it's very common in the law where you might have multiple causes, and that's what gets worked out by the court.
Senator, while you're here, you made this very clear, and I appreciate that. Just on the tweet about ICE in San Francisco, Ron Ford, Channel 4 News just wants to get a quick take on Friday night ICE went downtown San Francisco office buildings. Yep. According to your tweet, you said that Trump says he's only targeting criminals. That's a bald-faced lie. Just tell us, if you wouldn't mind, what you know about the situation and what you'd like to see happen from here.
Sure, and SEIU Local 87, which represents our very hardworking downtown janitors in San Francisco, has announced that they're doing a press conference tomorrow at 11 in City Hall. I don't want to speak for them. I have been in contact with the union, and I'm aware that ICE was at various downtown San Francisco office buildings on Friday evening. Our janitors, our city wouldn't function without our janitors. They keep our offices clean, they help our economy run, they are salt of the earth. They're just trying to work and pay taxes and raise their families. And Donald Trump is creating a terror campaign to try to scare and terrify these hardworking residents, members of our community, and we don't need ICE in San Francisco.
On this topic here today, if you can help us understand, if these insurance companies are not inclined to sue fossil fuel companies right now, as you've stated, how does this bill change that inclination and lead them to be inclined?
I've not stated that they're not inclined, but what this bill will do is give them a very explicit right of action to go into court and to seek or subrogation or compensation from the fossil fuel companies, and so it'll give them a very explicit right of action to be able to do that. I mean, the oil industry says a lot of things, and they've been saying a lot of things for like 50 years, including lying about climate change for a long time. and then pretending like they're going to transition to become clean energy companies at the same time that they're expanding oil extraction. We know that Donald Trump went to the oil industry last year and said, if you put up $1 billion, I'll make sure to give you whatever you want. And we're already seeing him wanting to expand drilling in very environmentally sensitive areas in Alaska. And now he's saying he wants AI servers to be fueled by coal plants located nearby. So, the oil industry says a lot of things, talking about oil or water storage, that's parroting right-wing talking points about what happened in LA. And so the reality is that the fundamental reason why we have disasters that are so much more frequent and so much bigger in scale than they were 5 or 10 years ago, the reason why we have not just wildfires, the largest wildfire disaster in California history in January, that's not just random. That's because of climate change being fueled by fossil fuels, and these companies have made that happen. And so that's why they should be at the table in helping with recovery and not just dumping all the responsibility on the victims, on taxpayers, and policyholders.
Fitzgerald with Cap Radio here in Sacramento. I guess I'm wondering, like you alluded to a few moments ago, that it's not one fossil fuel company that the causality isn't direct. So how do you function this? How do you imagine this functioning in reality when it comes to people suing the fossil fuel industry?
Well, we know there's already litigation around the fossil fuel industry. Our Attorney General, Rob Bonta, has sued the oil companies. Other states, for example, Hawaii, has, and that just went up to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court denied review and is letting that litigation proceed. And there is modeling that's done that informs this kind of liability. And obviously, the oil industry has every right to defend itself and to contest it, and it's doing that vigorously in the lawsuits, and I'm sure it will in these lawsuits as well if this bill passes. But by passing this, if we're able to pass this bill into law, it will create that explicit right of action and define the liability, and so that will be incredibly strong.
Have you had any conversation with the governor's office in this regard?
No. And typically before you introduce a bill, that you would not get, it would be rare that you would get that kind of early feedback from the governor. The governor, we tend to engage with the administration as the process proceeds, and we'll do so here just like we do with all bills. Any other questions? Okay, answered it all. Thank you so much, everyone. Very much appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator.